At 11:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on the morning of April 28, 2026, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy issued a statement declaring the Strait of Hormuz closed to all commercial shipping traffic bound for nations supporting what Iran called the illegal sanctions regime. What happened in the 96 hours that followed was not a negotiation. It was a demonstration of power so overwhelming that it redrew the strategic map of the Persian Gulf in ways that will echo for decades. The blockade collapsed. The Iranian regime fractured. And the United States Navy proved once again that the question was never whether Iran could close the Strait of Hormuz. The question was how long it would take American forces to reopen it. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, connecting the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea beyond. Through this choke point flows approximately 21 million barrels of oil per day, representing roughly 21% of the world's entire seaborne petroleum supply and 30% of all liquefied natural gas transported by sea. The economic mathematics are not theoretical. Every day the strait remains closed costs the global economy an estimated $400 million in direct energy costs alone, with cascading effects pushing the total economic impact past $2 billion daily when accounting for supply chain disruptions, manufacturing slowdowns, and market volatility. For context, that is more than the entire annual gross domestic product of Belize disappearing from the global economy every single day. Iran announced the blockade at a moment calculated for maximum leverage. Global oil inventories sat at historically low levels following 3 consecutive quarters of demand exceeding supply projections. Strategic petroleum reserves in the United States, Europe, and Japan had been drawn down by a combined 180 million barrels over the previous 18 months to stabilize prices during earlier market disruptions. The International Energy Agency's emergency response capacity stood at approximately 45 days of coverage for OECD nations at normal consumption rates. But with the Strait of Hormuz closed, that timeline compressed to roughly 23 days before critical shortages would trigger rationing protocols in major economies. The Iranian calculation was straightforward. Force oil prices past $150 per barrel, trigger recession fears across Western economies, create political pressure on governments to lift sanctions in exchange for reopening the strait, and demonstrate that Iran possessed escalation dominance in the Persian Gulf regardless of American naval superiority. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had spent years preparing for precisely this scenario, investing billions in coastal missile batteries, fast attack boats, naval mines, and submarine capabilities designed specifically to deny American forces freedom of movement in the confined waters of the Persian Gulf and the strait itself. Subscribe to Dr. Elena Harris right now and hit that notification bell because what the United States did in response moved faster than any news cycle could track. And you need to understand exactly how American strategy dismantled Iran's most powerful card in 96 hours of operations that military analysts are already comparing to the most decisive naval campaigns in modern history. The blockade began with theatrical precision designed for maximum psychological impact. At 6:23 a.m. local time in the Persian Gulf, IRGC Navy fast attack boats swarmed a Marshall Islands-flagged crude oil tanker, the Pacific Voyager, as it approached the traffic separation scheme in the eastern approach to the strait. The vessel, carrying 2 million barrels of Saudi crude valued at approximately $180 million, was 8 nautical miles from the separation point when IRGC boats fired warning shots across its bow using mounted 7mm heavy machine guns. The tanker's captain, following standard protocols for piracy situations, brought the vessel to a full stop and awaited instructions. Within 14 minutes, IRGC personnel boarded the Pacific Voyager, detained the 23-member crew in the vessel's mess hall, and began maneuvering the ship toward Iranian territorial waters near Bandar Abbas. The operation was broadcast in real time on Iranian state television, with cameras capturing IRGC troops raising the Iranian flag over the ship's bridge. The message was unmistakable. Iran controlled the strait. Commercial shipping moved only with Iranian permission. The sanctions regime had just become exponentially more expensive to maintain. The seizure triggered immediate consequences across global energy markets. Brent crude futures spiked $18 per barrel in the first hour of trading following the announcement, reaching $147 per barrel before circuit breakers temporarily halted trading. West Texas Intermediate jumped $16 per barrel to $143. European natural gas futures climbed 34% in a single session. Equity markets collapsed, with the S&P 500 dropping 2%, the FTSE falling 8%, and Asian markets that had not yet closed experiencing similar declines. Approximately 3 trillion in global market capitalization evaporated in the first 8 hours following Iran's blockade announcement. For the Iranian regime, the market reaction represented validation of their strategic calculation. The pain was immediate, measurable, and politically explosive for Western governments facing voter anger over inflation and economic stagnation. The IRGC leadership, particularly Defense Minister Ahmad Vahidi, had argued for months that economic leverage represented Iran's most effective weapon against American pressure. The nuclear program negotiations had stalled. Sanctions had devastated Iran's formal economy, but had not produced regime change or fundamental policy shifts. The blockade was meant to force a grand bargain. Iran would reopen the strait in exchange for comprehensive sanctions relief, recognition of regional security interests, and de facto acceptance of Iran's nuclear program at its current level of advancement. But the Iranian calculation contained a fatal assumption. It assumed the United States would negotiate. It assumed American strategy prioritized avoiding military confrontation over maintaining freedom of navigation. It assumed that economic pain would override strategic principles. Those assumptions were about to be tested against the full weight of American naval power operating under rules of engagement designed not to manage the crisis, but to end it. The United States Fifth Fleet maintains a permanent presence in the Persian Gulf, operating from Naval Support Activity Bahrain with approximately 20 vessels, including destroyers, cruisers, coastal patrol ships, and mine countermeasures units. At the moment Iran announced the blockade, the carrier strike group USS Theodore Roosevelt was conducting operations in the North Arabian Sea, approximately 400 nautical miles from the Strait of Hormuz. The strike group consisted of the Nimitz-class aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt, carrying approximately 70 aircraft, 4 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, 1 Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser, and 2 Los Angeles-class fast attack submarines. Combined naval and air assets in the region numbered over 140 American warships and submarines, more than 350 combat aircraft, and approximately 35,000 naval and air force personnel. The response began not with negotiation, but with mobilization. At 2:14 m. Eastern Time, 6 hours after Iran seized the Pacific Voyager, United States Central Command issued new rules of engagement to all naval forces in the region. Any Iranian military vessel approaching within 1,000 yards of commercial shipping in international waters would receive a single warning. Failure to alter course within 60 seconds would result in weapons release. Any Iranian aircraft approaching coalition vessels or commercial shipping would be intercepted at 50 nautical miles. Any radar emissions consistent with anti-ship missile targeting would trigger immediate suppression of enemy air defenses protocols. The United States was not preparing to negotiate the reopening of the strait. The United States was preparing to impose its reopening through overwhelming application of military force. The strategic architecture underlying the American response reflected decades of planning for precisely this scenario. The 1988 Operation Praying Mantis had established precedent. When Iranian forces laid mines that damaged the guided missile frigate USS Samuel B. Roberts, the United States Navy responded by destroying 2 Iranian oil platforms, sinking 1 frigate, damaging another, and eliminating 6 Iranian speedboats in a single day of operations that demonstrated American escalation dominance. The lesson from 1988 was clear. Iran could initiate confrontation in the Persian Gulf. The United States would dictate how and when that confrontation concluded. The first American move came not through direct military action, but through economic warfare designed to transform Iran's leverage into a liability. Within 12 hours of the blockade announcement, the United States Treasury Department announced emergency sanctions targeting every entity involved in Iranian oil production, transportation, and sale. The sanctions carried secondary provisions threatening any financial institution, shipping company, or commercial entity conducting business with Iranian oil interests, with complete exclusion from the American financial system and dollar-denominated transactions. The Qudsi was unambiguous. Any company choosing to do business with Iran would be choosing to exit the American market entirely. Simultaneously, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve began coordinated releases with International Energy Agency partners. The United States committed to releasing 1 million barrels per day for 90 days from the SPR. Japan committed 400,000 barrels per day. South Korea added 300,000 barrels per day. The European Union member states collectively committed 650,000 barrels per day from their strategic reserves. The combined release totaled 35 million barrels per day of crude oil entering global markets, offsetting a significant portion of the supply disruption from the Strait of Hormuz closure. Oil prices, which had spiked to $147 per barrel immediately following the blockade announcement, retreated to $134 per barrel within 24 hours as markets absorbed the reserve release commitments. The economic counteroffensive accomplished multiple strategic objectives simultaneously. It demonstrated that the United States and its allies possessed the resources to weather a prolonged closure without capitulating to Iranian demands. It reduced the immediate economic pain that might have generated political pressure for negotiations. It shifted economic pressure back onto Iran by flooding the market with alternative supply that would depress prices once the strait reopened, making Iranian oil less valuable and Iranian leverage less credible. And it bought time for military operations to develop without operating under crisis-level urgency that might produce suboptimal tactical decisions. But here is where the Iranian miscalculation became catastrophic and where American strategy revealed its true sophistication. Iran's leverage existed only so long as the Strait of Hormuz remained closed. Every day of closure cost Iran approximately $150 million in lost oil export revenue, money that Iran's sanctions-devastated economy desperately needed. Iran's oil production averaged approximately 1 million barrels per day, but with export routes blocked and domestic consumption at only 9 million barrels per day, Iran was producing 200,000 barrels per day that had nowhere to go. Iranian storage capacity totaled approximately 28 million barrels across all facilities. At a surplus production rate of 200,000 barrels daily, Iran had exactly 140 days before every storage tank in the country filled completely, and oil wells would need to shut down to prevent overflow. Shutting down oil wells creates permanent damage to reservoir pressure and long-term production capacity. Petroleum engineers refer to this as reservoir degradation. Once wells shut down due to lack of storage, restarting them requires extensive and expensive remediation work, and in many cases, wells never return to previous production levels. Iran was not just losing revenue during the blockade. Iran was risking permanent damage to the productive capacity that generated that revenue. The clock was not running on American patience. The clock was running on Iranian economic survival. The United States Navy understood this timeline completely and structured operations accordingly. The goal was not to defeat Iranian military forces in extended combat. The goal was to demonstrate that Iranian forces could not prevent American ships from transiting the strait, thereby eliminating Iranian leverage and forcing the regime to choose between ending the blockade voluntarily or watching American vessels transit, despite all Iranian efforts to prevent it. The operation that followed was designated Operation Resolute Passage, and its execution represented one of the most sophisticated displays of integrated naval warfare in the 21st century. Phase 1 began 18 hours after the blockade announcement, when the USS Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group altered course from the North Arabian Sea toward the Strait of Hormuz, accelerating to flank speed of approximately 30 knots. Simultaneously, the amphibious-ready group USS Bataan, operating in the Red Sea, received orders to transit the Suez Canal and proceed at maximum speed toward the Persian Gulf. The Bataan carried the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit, approximately 2,200 Marines with organic aviation assets, including MV-22 Osprey tiltrotor aircraft, AH-1Z Viper attack helicopters, and F-35B Lightning II short takeoff vertical landing strike fighters. Additional destroyer and cruiser assets from the Mediterranean and Indian Ocean received orders to converge on the Gulf of Oman, creating a concentration of naval firepower unprecedented in the region since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The buildup was visible, intentional, and psychologically calculated. The United States was not attempting to disguise its intentions or create operational surprise. The United States was demonstrating overwhelming force deliberately, signaling to Iran that the question was not whether American ships would transit the strait, but how much of Iran's military infrastructure would remain intact after they did. Every ship movement was announced publicly through Central Command press releases. Every asset deployment was tracked by commercial satellite imagery and reported by news organizations. The message was explicit. Iran could witness the approaching storm and choose to end the blockade, or Iran could test whether its coastal defenses could withstand the full weight of American naval aviation and precision strike capabilities. Subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because what happened next involves military technology and tactical execution operating at a level that most coverage is not equipped to analyze, and you need to understand exactly how modern naval warfare actually functions when a prepared adversary faces the United States Navy in its primary operational domain. Iran's defensive preparations for a Strait of Hormuz confrontation had been underway for more than a decade, representing billions in investment and the central component of the IRGC's area denial strategy. The Iranian approach emphasized asymmetric capabilities designed to exploit geographic advantages in the confined waters of the Persian Gulf and the strait itself. The strait's narrow dimensions, shallow depth in many areas, and proximity to Iranian territory created tactical conditions that theoretically favored defenders over an attacking fleet. The Iranian order of battle included approximately 50 fast attack craft, ranging from 15-meter Siraj-class boats to larger 40-meter Kaman-class vessels, all equipped with anti-ship missiles, heavy machine guns, and in some cases, rocket launchers. These craft operated on a swarming doctrine, where large numbers of small boats would overwhelm larger warships through distributed attacks from multiple vectors simultaneously. The small boats' minimal radar cross-section and high speed made them difficult targets for naval guns, while their ability to hide among commercial fishing vessels and operate from small coastal bases complicated targeting decisions. Iran's coastal missile batteries represented the second layer of defense, with approximately 30 sites along the northern coast of the strait equipped with Chinese-designed C-802 anti-ship cruise missiles, Russian-designed P-800 missiles acquired through Syria, and domestically produced variants including the Gator and Khalij Fars systems. These missiles featured ranges between 120 and 300 kilometers, active radar homing guidance, and sea-skimming flight profiles designed to evade ship-based air defense systems. The missiles were mobile, operating from transporter erector launchers that could relocate after firing to complicate counter-battery operations. The third defensive layer consisted of naval mines, with Iran having produced thousands of bottom mines, moored mines, and more sophisticated influence mines triggered by magnetic, acoustic, or pressure signatures. Intelligence assessments suggested Iran had pre-positioned mines at strategic locations throughout the strait, ready for rapid deployment if conflict appeared imminent. Mine warfare represented perhaps Iran's most cost-effective capability, with individual mines costing thousands of dollars, potentially disabling vessels worth billions, while forcing naval forces into time-consuming and dangerous mine clearance operations. Iranian submarine capabilities added a fourth dimension, with 3 Russian-designed Kilo-class diesel-electric submarines and approximately 20 smaller Ghadir-class midget submarines operating in the Persian Gulf. The Kilo-class boats, while aging, remained capable platforms equipped with wake-homing torpedoes and potentially anti-ship cruise missiles. The midget submarines were designed for coastal operations in shallow water where larger submarines could not effectively operate, posing specific threats to vessels transiting predictable routes through the strait. The defensive architecture looked formidable on paper, representing exactly the kind of multi-layered area denial system that Chinese strategists advocated as a model for countering American naval power. The theory held that even if American forces could eventually prevail through superior technology and training, the cost in time, ships, and casualties would be prohibitive enough to deter the attempt. Iran had bet its strategic position in the Persian Gulf on that theory. The United States was about to demonstrate why the theory failed when confronting the full spectrum of American maritime warfare capabilities. The actual operation began not with ships entering the strait, but with comprehensive intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance preparation that mapped every Iranian military asset within 200 kilometers of the waterway. RC-135 rivet joint signals intelligence aircraft operating from Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar cataloged every Iranian radar emission, communications transmission, and electronic signature associated with military operations. RQ-4 Global Hawk unmanned aerial vehicles maintained 24-hour surveillance orbits over the Persian Gulf, their synthetic aperture radar and electro-optical sensors tracking every vessel movement and ground-based military activity. P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, equipped with advanced sensors for anti-submarine warfare, mapped underwater acoustic signatures, and located Iranian submarine positions with precision enabled by decades of sensor development and operational experience. The intelligence picture that emerged was comprehensive and updated in near real time. American forces knew the location of every Iranian missile site, every fast attack boat, every radar installation, and every command and control node associated with defending the strait. That intelligence enabled targeting solutions developed days before the first American vessel entered contested waters. The question was not whether American forces could locate and neutralize Iranian defenses. The question was the sequence and timing that would minimize risk to American personnel while maximizing the psychological impact of the operation. Phase 2 commenced when the Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group reached a position 150 nautical miles southeast of the Strait of Hormuz, placing its air wing within striking distance of all Iranian military targets, while remaining outside the range of most Iranian land-based anti-ship missiles. At 4:37 a.m. local time, exactly 72 hours after Iran's initial blockade announcement, 4 Fa-18E Super Hornet strike fighters launched from the Theodore Roosevelt, carrying AGM-88E advanced anti-radiation missiles designed specifically for suppressing enemy air defenses. The HARM missiles are engineered to home in on radar emissions, following the electronic signals back to their source and destroying the radar installation with a 146-pound blast fragmentation warhead traveling at Mach 2. The beauty of anti-radiation warfare from an operational perspective is that it creates an impossible choice for defenders. Keep radars active to track incoming threats and provide those threats with perfect targeting data, or shut down radars to avoid giving away positions and operate effectively blind against incoming attacks. Iran chose to keep selected radars active, attempting to maintain situational awareness despite the risk. It was the wrong choice. The first 4 HARM missiles destroyed 3 coastal surveillance radars and 1 fire control radar associated with a C-802 missile battery within 7 minutes of launch. Secondary strikes followed at 6-minute intervals over the next hour, methodically eliminating every Iranian radar system that emitted trackable signals. By 6:15 a.m., on Iran's integrated air defense network along the strait had been reduced to individual sites operating in visual mode without electronic coordination, transforming a networked defensive system into isolated units incapable of supporting each other or maintaining comprehensive coverage. With Iranian radars suppressed and surveillance capabilities degraded, Phase 3 initiated as 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, USS Spruance and USS Paul Hamilton, entered the strait from the Gulf of Oman under cover of darkness. The destroyers are formidable vessels, each displacing 9,200 tons, spanning 509 feet in length, and carrying crews of 380. Their armament includes 90 to 96 vertical launch system cells loaded with a mix of Tomahawk cruise missiles for land attack, SM-2 and SM-6 surface-to-air missiles for air defense, and anti-submarine warfare rockets. The ships mount a 5-inch Mark 45 gun capable of firing 20 rounds per minute to a range exceeding 13 nautical miles, plus phalanx close-in weapon systems as last-ditch defense against incoming missiles. The destroyer's mission was not to engage Iranian forces unless attacked, but to demonstrate that American vessels could transit the strait despite all Iranian declarations and preparations to the contrary. The ships entered the traffic separation scheme at 12 knots, deliberately slow, broadcasting their positions via automatic identification systems, ensuring that every Iranian military unit and every commercial vessel in the region knew exactly where American warships were transiting. The message was unmistakable. The United States was not sneaking through under cover of stealth technology or darkness. The United States was sailing through in plain view, daring Iran to act on its blockade threats. Iran faced the decision the American strategy had engineered: allowed the destroyers to transit without interference, thereby admitting the blockade was unenforceable and sacrificing all leverage gained from the past 72 hours of crisis, or engage American warships and trigger a military confrontation against an adversary that had just demonstrated the ability to eliminate Iranian air defenses in under 2 hours. The IRGC Navy made its choice at 5:43 a.m. when 8 fast attack boats departed Bandar Abbas Harbor and accelerated toward the approaching destroyers at speeds exceeding 40 knots. What happened in the next 11 minutes has been analyzed by naval warfare experts as a textbook demonstration of modern surface combat coordination. The Theodore Roosevelt's E-2D Advanced Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft detected the Iranian boats the moment they cleared Bandar Abbas Harbor, tracking their course and speed while feeding targeting data to the destroyers via secure data link. The destroyer's SBI-1D phased array radars locked onto all 8 boats simultaneously, calculating intercept solutions for multiple weapon systems. At 3,000 yards, USS Spruance transmitted a warning via international maritime distress frequencies in both English and Farsi, instructing the Iranian boats to alter course immediately or be engaged. The boats maintained course. At 2,000 yards, Spruance's Mark 45 gun began firing, placing 5-inch shells in a line 200 yards ahead of the lead Iranian boats. The boats maintained course. At 1,500 yards, both destroyers opened fire with their main guns in direct engagement mode, targeting the boat's engines and command structures with GPS-guided munitions, achieving accuracy measured in feet rather than yards. The first Iranian boat took 3 direct hits and exploded, likely due to onboard munitions or fuel detonation triggered by the incoming rounds. The second boat disintegrated after 2 hits to its engine compartment. The third boat attempted evasive maneuvers and took a single hit to its bridge, killing the command crew and leaving the vessel drifting. The remaining 5 boats broke off their approach, reversed course, and fled back toward Iranian territorial waters at maximum speed. The engagement lasted 4 minutes. 8 boats departed. 3 were destroyed. 5 retreated. The destroyers continued their transit without altering course or speed. The psychological impact far exceeded the tactical outcome. Iran had deployed its primary asymmetric capability, the fast boat swarm that was supposed to overwhelm American defenses through numbers and speed. American forces had engaged and defeated that capability in less time than a commercial break during a news broadcast. The footage, captured by drone aircraft and released by Central Command 6 hours later, circulated globally within minutes. Naval analysts immediately recognized the implications. If Iranian fast boats could not approach American destroyers without being destroyed at ranges exceeding a mile, then the entire Iranian area denial strategy was fundamentally compromised. But the operation was not complete, and the American strategy had deeper objectives than simply defeating a fast boat attack. The goal was not just to prove Iranian defenses inadequate. The goal was to reopen the strait to commercial traffic, which required demonstrating that merchant vessels could transit safely under American protection. At 9:22 a.m., and 3 hours after the destroyer engagement, a Maersk container ship, the Eleonora Maersk, entered the strait from the Gulf of Oman, escorted by 2 American destroyers and 1 British Type 45 destroyer. The ship, flagged in Denmark and carrying automobile parts valued at approximately $85 million, became the test case for whether Iran would fire on civilian vessels under military escort.